What's going on, everybody? This is Nolan Hack and Jen Deerinwater. So glad to be with you, Jen.
Yeah, likewise, Nolan. Always happy when we can talk and complain about the state of the world together.
I'm amazed they allow us to actually do that.
Yeah, no kidding.
Let's be thankful. We have a serious situation going down in Akron, Ohio. Weapons have actually come out, and we have a protester on the line there as a part of the Million Mask March. And we're going to throw it over to our producer, Tim, temporarily, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Cool. Thank you, Nolan. So, yeah, I'm here with the Akron Anons. Well, I'm not here. They're on the line right now. We promised they'd be calling in today for the first show, but I guess a lot of shit went crazy down there. So, what's up, man? Are you still here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so yeah, you wanna tell us what's going on and what people need to do to support y'all right now?
Okay, so what happened was, like a few months ago, back in January, we had booted an Akron Anon by the name of Mary Langley, also known as VampGirl69101 on Twitter. Since then, on July 14th, her house caught on fire at 12:30 at night. Her dog was killed. Her daughter died of her smoke inhalation and of third-degree burns to her back, and died in the hospital early the next morning. So then I get a phone call that this had gone down by another Akron Anon by the name of Vince Chlorophyll. He advised me that she was saying that I had involvement in it, which I had nothing to do with. I was actually in bed with my wife that night, way out in a different county in a whole nother city, like 20 miles from Akron. And I even have my internet history from that night, the router history that proved my phone was connected, that proved my laptop was connected. I have the torrent downloads from that night with the timestamp and date. Since then, she has called Akron PD and Akron Fire and accused me of doing it. And she then accused another Akron Anon by the name of Smoke, who's 17 years old and lives another 20 miles in a different direction in a different town, who doesn't even have a license of being involved, just because he spoke up against her about me. And then another Akron Anon by the name of Zero Cool stepped up to her and said she was wrong again, and she accused him. Now, he's got health issues. He has heart condition. He has a breathing issues on the breathing machine 24/7, and she accused him. She also stated that I owned a black Mustang, and she saw me in a black Mustang that night, which I have never even owned a black Mustang. I don't even have a license or insurance. She then turned around and said I used my wife's car. Well, then she told other people that an intruder came into her house that night, broke in the back door, and ran from the house and broke her fence. Now, if I had a vehicle, wouldn't the vehicle still have been there if I ran from the house? She also stated to others that, that she wasn't even home that night. And then she turned around and changed the story and said that, well, I was home that night, but I was upstairs getting ready for bed, and then we smelled smoke. She claimed that her husband and another person by the name of Deleon Greer drove by my wife's grandma's house in a whole nother town 15 miles away, and then I was standing on the deck during the fire. How could I be in two places at once? So since then, she showed up today. She had a person like at the bus station where we meet up watching to see when we showed up, and he was on the phone with her, another ex-Akron Anon by the name of Deleon Greer. And he was telling her where we were, when we were leaving, things like that. Little did we know, she was up in Akron PD inside the police station even before we even started the march, telling them where we were. And she also admitted in a video that's up on YouTube bashing us and bashing me, and she admitted to ratting out our brother Akron Phoenix 420 and said in the video that she would rat me out also for DDoS attacks. Today she came running out of the Akron PD building as soon as she saw us and tried to attack me physically. And her group that was doing the scouting for her were following us down the sidewalk and tried to physically assault me. and the militia guy and I pulled the pepper spray out and told them to back up, and they refused. So then we kept going. We marched down to the police station. They backed off, but Akron PD was outside and had their hands on their guns. So we just kept walking by, and we went down to the federal building and then looped back around. And that's when she came running out of the PD and tried to attack me. So then we took off towards the college campus, and the militia extracted me, and I left.
You said there was a Nazi out there too. Was they with her, or was that some?
There was incident? A Nazi, yeah. Before the march started, some guy came out of the woods by Old Factory and threw up a Sig Heil Hitler salute to us. Oh, I don't know what that was about, but
that wasn't somebody connected with them.
That was something totally different. But that was. But yeah, this girl she's nuts. I feel for her. I feel that, what happened to her daughter and her dog was terrible. I would never wish that upon anybody. And none of us had anything to do with her house fire.
Yeah, I think a lot of us.
Before the house fire, there was a bunch of other house fires in Akron, Ohio, in the same neighborhood, the same time of night, for like 6 months even before her fire, and the same style houses. And the city had been to take that for a long time. They have been trying to drive people out. They were trying to drive people out because they wanted to make it like real. So they were trying to kick everybody out and condemn everybody's houses. Her house in particular, little did we know upon this whole situation. We've been making... All right, hold on a second. Is that better?
I think so. You just kept dropping out, but yeah, a lot of us have been following this since basically it started online, and it's a horrible situation. It's a horrible situation.
It is, and there was a bunch of other fires in Akron, Ohio, before her fire even happened. And like I said, there was like a good 27 other fires that were all suspicious in the same neighborhood, same time of night, everything, even months before her fire was even happened. And we were all investigating it, and it was called Op Akron Fires. It's up on our YouTube account. And she didn't even do the investigative journalism like she should have. Neither did Akron Fire. This arson investigator, Nathan Falcone is his name, ended up calling our cell phones and accusing us of being suspects in her fire. When he didn't even ask any of the witnesses like that saw all of us that were accused at home. He didn't even bother to do any investigation. He just immediately called us and started treating us like we were criminals. And he even told me when I told him that I have an alibi and whatnot. When I told him I had an attorney from Free Anons, he told me having an attorney is illegal and criminal.
Since when?
Little did we know, we did some investigative work on our own. Turns out this Mr. Nathan Falcone is also an Akron PD officer. So when he called our phone, he failed to identify himself as a police officer. And he didn't read anybody Miranda rights. Now, if you're going to say somebody's a suspect, you need to read them the Miranda rights and identify yourself as a police officer. He did not do that.
That's crazy stuff. So let me ask you this: what can I know Nolan and Jen got to get back on this show, but thank you. What can everyone listening do? Like what do you need activists and other people to do to help with? We
need activists and other anons to call Akron PD and Akron Fire and explain to them that we're not the bad guys. We had nothing to do with this, and to work with somebody who's an ex-Akron anon who has a personal vendetta with us. They need to be told that this is a bunch of bull crap, and they can't be working with people who have a personal beef that's totally unfounded. Like, this is a bunch of bullshit. They were outside with their fucking hands on their guns, and she was inside the building today. Well, they were fucking working with that bitch.
She's an admitted snitch. She got Phoenix.
She's an admitted snitch, and she also has a history. We found out. We did a criminal background check on her. She had been doing burglaries in North Carolina years ago and had rolled over on her burglary partner and got 10 years of probation. This is all documented. We have it all. And earlier yesterday morning, we found out that she is on the FBI's terror watch list.
Well, I'm sure a lot of us are on that list.
No, like she did something. And if she didn't do something, normally the feds will put you on that list if you're one of their snitches.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, that's just a crazy situation. So yeah, I mean, I would encourage everybody listening to call I posted the Akron PD number on my account. People have been retweeting it. Just look at my Twitter and you'll see it. It's on People's Radio and my personal. We encourage
everybody to call Akron Fire and Akron PD and tell them to back the fuck off, because we had nothing to do with this. And to say that our attorney from Free Anons to have an attorney is illegal and criminal, that's straight bullshit. That's
your right in any state.
And the fact is that fucking arson investigator did not identify himself as a police officer or even read Miranda rights to anybody, yet he wanted to claim people were suspects. That's illegal also. He broke procedure. I've asked an ex-cop from Ohio the rule on that, who's actually an ex-cop who turned anon, believe it or not. He now lives in Florida, and I called him and asked him about this, and he said, oh, no. He even broke procedure. Like, that's calling somebody and trying to interrogate them over the phone is not procedure.
Yeah.
Because you cannot prove that that's you on the phone.
Yeah, that's really crazy.
This Nathan Falcone needs to be investigated by Internal Affairs, and he needs to be fired.
Definitely.
The corruption in Akron just gets worse and worse. If you guys haven't heard, there was a 16-year-old kid last year who was pulled over for suspected burglary. Now, they patted him down, had his hands handcuffed tightly in the back of the cop car, and he magically shot himself in the back of the head and killed himself.
Wow.
Tell me this, how does somebody with their hands tied or handcuffed behind their back shoot themselves in the back of the head? It's not physically possible.
Yeah, it happened in Ferguson as well, I believe, to one of the protesters out there.
And then in November, the Akron police chief, Chief Neese, was fired because he was coercing underranked female officers to have sex with him and trying to bribe city officials to get his nephew off of criminal felony narcotics charges. Then the police captain in Akron was removed the next month because he pulled over a 16-year-old female, illegally went through her phone, stole her nudes off of her cell phone, and was giving them to fellow officers. He was charged with child pornography. Then, last week, another Akron officer got in trouble because he posted racial slurs on his Facebook page about a prominent preacher here in the U.S. who's black.
Yeah, pigs are bullshit, man. We know this.
Akron PD has a running history. They have our brother Akron Phoenix locked up right now because they say he caused damage to their servers from a cheap $40 cell phone just by himself to 2 different freaking websites. First of all, you can't fucking take down websites by yourself with a cheap $40 cell phone. I don't care who you are. You can't do it. Not possible.
Yeah.
And
we got like 1 more minute before we have to come on. But what I'm going to tell you right now is maybe whenever you want, I know we talked about it before online, maybe if you want to go into detail on this a little more, we can do a show about it still if you want. It's totally up to you, though.
I can do that.
So, yeah, I don't mean to cut you off, but I got to get back to this show. But like anytime, any day, just hit me up and we'll do a impromptu show and we'll go into real detail and all this stuff.
Alrighty.
So definitely, thank you for coming on. Thank you for giving us the update. And like we said, I encourage everyone, call the Akron Police Department, call the Akron Fire Department, demand that these cats be left alone and the Akron Anons get the justice they deserve, and just the peace of mind that they're not being attacked by all this bullshit. So yeah, penny for the guy as all cops are bastards. That's true. So yeah, thanks again, Casper. And like I said, like hit me on the DM right now. We can schedule a show whenever you want to do it. It's all good. Okay.
Yep, we'll do.
Yeah, much love and respect, man. And I'll talk to you soon. And
All right.
we're gonna hand it on over to Jen and Nolan now. Are you guys still here?
I am indeed.
All right. Sorry about the delay, but I think it was very important because these are some activists getting harassed in some crazy ways. So yeah, with no further ado, Jen and Nolan.
Well, that's a shame. I wish I could say it's a surprise. Both of us, Jen and I, have experienced too much of that type of infiltration and collusion. Just
Yes, indeed we have, and both of our communities have as well for a very long time.
too long, way too long. That's why we're on the air right now and talking about. Well, we have lots to talk about, and we're going to start with the subject we really don't want to talk about, and that's the American elections happening tomorrow.
Oh God.
About any other subjects you don't want to talk about. Pumpkin spice lattes. What's the best spice to put extra spice? Anything else but this dogged wretch. Another one. They don't stop.
No, they don't. So, what's happening out in California? And for people listening, I am DC based. I'm a journalist, and I do some trainings and speaking stuff, and basically an indigenous agitator out to take the colonizer down. Yeah.
Which is, if you read any Crazy Horse, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, you name it, that's what they tell us to do. Instead, we continue to participate in this charade, and I don't just mean voting in general. Voting, at least in my mind, has its place within the system, depending, I guess, on the candidates, and playing that lesser of two evil type of game, or if there's a proposition or on the ballot, like allowing the LGBT community to get married, I definitely think that is something that should be voted on, and obviously has been, and thankfully is now law. But as for California, I was talking about this with Jen yesterday, and there's this character named Gil Cisneros, and I know too much about this man. I don't even know that much, but I know too much. In the 39th district in California, this dude is running for Congress, trying to become a congressman. And all I have seen for 2 months, when I turn on YouTube, is attack ads of this guy. Attacking this guy. I don't know who the other candidate is. I have no idea who the other candidate is. I just know this Gil Cisneros guy is apparently going to support this $39 trillion tax hike or some ridiculous. It would cost the public $39 trillion according to this ad, and that's all I'm seeing. I keep looking for the fine print on the bottom where it says paid for the campaign for whoever, and I can't see it. Now, a lot of times when you're on YouTube, you're on your phone, so it's even tougher to see. And I have no idea who the other candidate is.
The other candidate, I'm sorry, I was just going to say, the other
Educate me
candidate
on my
I
own
just
state,
looked it up is Young Kim. That's the Republican candidate.
She's a Republican. No, okay, I've seen her ads.
Yeah.
I've seen her ads, and of course, we're taught as people of color that the Democrats are fighting for people of color, and the Republicans are of the singular party that hate people of color, and it's all their fault. Now they are horrible, and they've been killing us for a long time. But this woman is Asian. She's a Republican.
Yep.
And her ads are saying how she's one of the common people. She fights for everybody, veterans, the homeless, blah blah blah. And she's a Republican. And Cisneros, well, he either has a very good tan, or he is also a person of color. And also, his name is Cisneros. So this is an example of how toxic this whole system is, and the election process. They're not even letting us vote in so many different areas of the country. Jen can speak to this at nauseum, and as far as North Dakota goes, taking the votes away from the original people of this land who couldn't vote until the 20th century.
Yeah, 1929. That's when we got American citizenship. But like with everything Indigenous related, it's complicated. Like, yes, we got American citizenship, and yes, we can, supposedly vote in elections, American elections and such, but it also was a way of stripping our sovereignty. So it was not the best move for us, but yeah. Yeah, I mean, we were talking about, like, I live in DC, so I get to see all the different ads for, what we call the DMV, which is DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And incumbent Senator Tim Kaine, who was Hillary's VP candidate, there have been all kinds of attack ads by supporters of Kaine against Corey Stewart, which is the Republican running for that seat. And, Corey Stewart's awful. He likes Jason Kessler. He campaigned for Roy Moore, which I don't know if people remember. He's the guy down in Alabama who's the pedophile. Corey Stewart's awful, but, man, I have not seen a single ad with Tim Kaine where it's actually talking about who Tim Kaine is and, like, what he's doing. It's just all these attacks on Corey Stewart. And as a result, Kaine is up. I checked earlier. He's up by, like, 18.5% of, like, the votes. Yeah, he's going to win. But
former vice presidential candidate, yeah.
Yeah, but there's no conversation happening around how, like, Kaine is horrible, too.
This guy supports the death penalty. He ran on the ticket of a white supremacist, Mrs. Clinton, and ironically, Hillary in 2008 dismissed the thought of Kaine being her running mate because she thought herself he was a, quote, terrible option. So this is how utterly ridiculous and how many layers of bullshit American politics have, and really, I will say, white politics have, and we continue to tell ourselves, after we are told that, hey, white politics are going to save us from white politics. Again, the ridiculousness of American politics doesn't make any sense. We still have a system where the presidential election is decided by slave states, former slave states, with the Electoral College. This is a complete joke, and we have to suffer through this joke year after year after year after year, and we get it from both sides. And neither Jen or I are affiliated with a party, but we get it from Democrats, we get it from Republicans. Democrats say, we have to vote it out. We have to flip seats. Oprah said herself, we are dishonoring our ancestors if we don't vote. and this is the same woman who has been friendly with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton for a long time, or at least recently. Now she doesn't like Trump anymore since it's not fashionable. And the Republicans say, "Well, no, that's the Klan. The Klan. That's the party. That's the Democratic Party. You know, the Klan is a party of liberals. Lincoln freed the slaves. The Democrats are killing black babies. Just absolute bullcorn that is being pumped down on us from either side, and it's a lot easier to refute the conservative side, because even science will tell you that the more openly racist you are, the more conservative your ideology is, the less intelligent you tend to be. So it's a lot easier to refute that gobbledygook from the right than it is from the left, especially when quote unquote heroes like JFK, Woodrow Wilson, even Lincoln, because Lincoln was a liberal of his day. If the two-party system that is in place now would have been in place then, of course it was pre-Dixiecrat crossover at the time, he would have been a Democrat. So these are people that we're supposed to view as heroes. Even I was about 11 years old, and I was in a restaurant in LA with some of my family. And like a lot of black families in the United States, we love the Clintons. We vote blue. We, unite blue, blue wave, the whole 9 yards. And I was a little bit of a rebellious child, and we were talking politics. My family's very well educated. Not that that is an automatic point of intelligence or any kind of that should deserve any kind of automatic praise, but no, we politics are brought up a lot. So I said, you know what? JFK didn't do enough for black people. Which, if you know anything about JFK, that's just the fact that the man hired his brother to be Attorney General of the country, and then they decided to tap MLK's phone and brand him as a communist. And the entire table looked at me, and this is a line I've stolen from Paul Mooney, the great comedian. They looked at me like I was from the planet Nigrosaurus. They're like, who brought him? Are we related to him? Are you... Get him out of here. And there's this, 75-year-old white lady within 5 feet of me to the next table. Again, looks at me like I'm from the planet Nigrosaurus. And that's what you deal with, even within your own family, even within your own friend groups, a lot of times, depending on the friends you keep, if you decide to step out of the matrix and understand what the realities that we actually face are. Realities such as you have a two-party system, both parties were birthed in white supremacy and have no intention of ever freeing us.
So your story about eating out with your family, that reminds me of my childhood. So I grew up in rural Oklahoma and Texas. And obviously goes without saying, it's very, very red states. Oklahoma in particular there's a Democratic governor from ages ago that had said that Oklahoma is so red it's actually maroon. And so I grew up with very conservative family members, including the Native people in my family, even, unfortunately. And so for me, being a Democrat was like scandalous to my family. And I remember sitting at, the dinner table with my grandparents and stuff and calling the men in my family male chauvinist pigs when I was 10 years old. So just my sort of like, oh, I'm a Democrat. Like that was a very radical thing for where I grew up. And I find it kind of comical. Your comment about Oprah's don't vote, we're dishonoring our ancestors. I remember when I was younger, I actually did think that way. That was one of the biggest reasons I was so excited when I turned 18 was to vote. Because to me, that was, the biggest part of like freedom with being able to vote, being able to have a say in the government. But as I got older and as I learned more about the government, as I worked for the Democrats and I ran their campaigns and I was a delegate several times, over time I just went, no, these people are pretty awful. I don't think that my ideas are right. And so now, you saying that quote about Oprah, I just shook my head. It's like, oh man, I used to be one of those assholes that thought that. And now, I feel so conflicted with voting because, on the one hand, like I do feel like at the very least, in some instances, we can use voting to mitigate harm. I don't think it's actually going to change the world and get us free, but I think we can mitigate harm in some instances with voting. But then on the flip side, I feel like voting in my colonizers' government is in a way legitimizing them and, their place on Turtle Island. And so I feel very back and forth about that. But then even voting in my own tribal government elections, Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, like I am a registered voter in my tribal government. But I even feel conflicted voting for them because I understand that our tribal government is in no way, shape, or form reflective of our traditional governing values. Many of our tribal governments were put together by the U.S. government. So even there, I feel like I can't even really have my vote mean something important,
It's a catch-22.
It is.
They keep us from voting, and then we're understandably going to think, well, geez, we want to vote, and we're sick of you pushing us around. But then on the other side, well, I don't want to vote for Hillary or Trump. I don't, or if I'm in Arizona, I don't want to vote for a woman who has taken over $200,000 from the Zionist group J Street, or another $20,000 from Goldman Sachs within this election year alone, or a woman who supports Trump and a border wall. That's the two options for senator to replace John McCain. So we're put into a corner, and these two women, Kirsten Sinema, and the other woman's name, I think it even matters, Martha McSally. And I say if it even matters, because there are clones of these two women through the entirety of Congress. Doesn't matter what color you are, doesn't matter what sexual orientation you are, doesn't matter what gender you are. If you are running as a Democrat or Republican, trying to get into Congress, trying to become a governor, trying to be president of the United States, trying to be a senator, you are corrupted. Because the only way you have a shot to win any of these seats is by selling your soul. That is the price you have to pay at the toll to get into Washington and try to actually have any power within this government.
Yeah, it's frustrating, and even when we look to our own community heroes, like Kristen Sinema is openly bisexual, and I'm bisexual. And I remember when I first learned of her years ago when she was still holding state office, I was so excited. I was like, a bisexual woman, openly, let me say that, an openly bisexual woman is in office. Isn't this great? And, as time goes on, you learn more, you look behind the wizard's curtain, and it's like, oh man, they're awful too. Yeah, I can't, I don't, we have a lot of natives running for congressional seats this year, and part of me wants to be excited about that, but then at the same time I'm just like, oh, but are you actually going to do right? Are you actually going to,
they won't
are you going to have your tribal nation's traditional values in how you make voting decisions? And it's like, well, no, even if the candidate wanted to, that's just not possible in the US government.
They'd be killed within 5 seconds. They killed JFK, who was a supporter of the Nazi regime, because he actually went to Germany in the 30s with his big-time Nazi father who was a U.S. ambassador to Germany. And then he became a Zionist, JFK, ironically, which is really weird. You're supporting the Nazis and you become a Zionist, pro-Jewish to a fault. That's weird. And this guy was killed.
Let's be real, though. Zionism isn't about supporting Jewish people.
Oh,
it's about supporting Israel.
That's true.
And honestly,
that's why I say to a fault, yeah.
Yeah, and like growing up where I did and hearing Christians and the horribly anti-Semitic things they would say and then turn around and praise Israel, to me, I see it as the U.S. is all up in bed with Israel, not because the U.S. loves Jewish people, but because the U.S. just really hates Muslims more. That's what it is, you know.
And I brought up JFK because if there was like a poll, I would imagine. Well, now it's Obama, ironically, but if there was a poll before Obama, I would imagine JFK would be in the top 3, or maybe be the most popular president, definitely the most quote-unquote liberal president, which people think is a good word, liberal, and he was killed. Bernie Sanders was blocked from even running for president, and he, another Zionist, managed to sign the crime bill, used Standing Rock as a tool to get him elected, hanging Native people out to dry. Only, if I remember correctly, he only authored one pro-Native bill before he ran for president in the 30 years that he's been in Congress before then. And he was blocked.
And all of his staffers have always been white. All of them. So that says a lot about him and his politics.
One of his staff, person who worked on his election, used to work for AIPAC, which is another big Zionist group.
God, AIPAC. They're so awful.
If you look at just this year alone, if you look at the top 20 members of Congress who have taken money from pro-Israel groups, you just go into opensecrets.org. The first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are Democrats. The next one is Ted Cruz with taking $318,000. Number 8 and 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 Democrats. And one of those people, Tim Kaine. Another one of those people, Tammy Baldwin, the first openly gay member of Congress, I believe. And another one, Heidi Heitkamp, who...
Oh, God, I can't stand her.
She supported No DAPL. She supported DAPL. She was against No DAPL. She was against No DAPL. She wanted the pipeline to go through. And again, that catch-22 of like, do we vote, do we not vote? Do we only vote in certain elections? If you're a Native person or just a person with a conscience in North Dakota, you're thinking, well, okay, the Republican's obviously horrible, but Heitkamp's horrible, but she's better than the Republican, and at least will let us keep our voting rights. But I don't want to vote for her. She's tried to take our land and was okay with us getting maced and blasted with hoses of freezing cold water. This is what we have to deal with as people of color every time one of these elections rolls around. It's
something that's also frustrating about Heidi is that Heidi Heitkamp and Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski over the last year or so have been getting all of this praise from Native people because they've supposedly come out in support of legislation that would address the crisis that we have of our murdered and missing Indigenous girls and women. But these two people are pro-pipeline. And the thing is that those resource extractive projects bring white men to our lands, and those white men are raping and trafficking and killing our people, not just our girls and our women, but our two-spirits and our boys and men as well. So for me, I'm like, it doesn't really make a difference, Heidi or Lisa, if you all support, these two little bills. If you're still all about sending pipelines through our lands. You're about overturning our tribal sovereignty. You know, the U.S. government has no more of a right to come in and tell our tribal nations what we can and can't do than they would to go in and tell France what they can or can't do. That's what it means to be a sovereign nation.
And they would never do that to France. They do that. No. They'll do that to Ethiopia. They'll do that to South Africa, Yemen, etc. But in France, no. There, Belgium, no.
Yeah, they undermine the sovereignty of anyone that they don't believe is capable of leading or that has the right, the human right to self-determination. And of course, they do this to people who have something that they want, like oil or gas or uranium.
Oh, jeez.
All of which, most of those deposits are on recognized indigenous lands. But so I'm going to ask you, Nolan, have you voted yet?
No, I have, to be honest with you, I have not voted since I voted for President Tom the second time, aka Obama. In 2012, I think it was.
So have you not even any like local elections, municipal, state?
Well, not even local. I voted for American Idol. No, I'm kidding. I live in a predominantly white community. I'm in LA, and I'm close enough to Orange County where that leaks over, and I don't see the point of voting for somebody who has absolutely no interest in helping my interests and the interests of my people, especially if they're going to get into you're talking about a U.S. Congress seat.
Yeah.
And the Dianne Feinstein is up for re-election for the 304th time, and I'm so glad Barbara Boxer finally quit, but then she got replaced by Kamala Harris.
Oh.
And Feinstein's the other senator, so okay, I don't want to do it. Black people in our hoods, which for Native people, their reservations, in our hoods, we had tribal elections and had to vote on people who a lot of times were picked by the United States government or pushed and prodded by the U.S. government to run our area, run our city, run our town, and how much more complicated that would make things in terms of trying to vote. And we do have a black Supreme Court justice.
You sure you want to claim him?
No. We've been trying to trade him for Jeff Goldblum or Helen Mirren for a long time. But Thomas made about 1 million votes of black folks in Florida not count. It became invalid in 2000, and he signed off giving the election legally to, well, I guess legal in U.S. law, since the Supreme Court is judge, jury, and executioner, giving the election to George W. Bush. Now, Al Gore is trash. Al Gore is trash, but it's George W. Bush. So even when we vote, you won't count them. As recently as I think the early 2018, the stat was half of the black men in Florida are not allowed to vote.
Well, and on another note of like disenfranchised voters, you and I both being disabled, people with disabilities have been like the rights of our rights to vote have been so undermined that it's ridiculous. Like it's hard to get out to the polls to vote if you have certain disabilities. Like, how are you supposed to get there? How do you use the machines? I worked at a poll years ago when I lived in New York City just to see what it was like. And under federal law, all polling locations have to have, these sort of like automated disability accessible voting machines, but no one at the polling location I was working at knew how to set it up, so it was never set up. So if you had somebody coming in that wanted to vote and use that, they couldn't. Wow. So then you become very dependent upon other people to vote for you and hope that they're voting the right way.
Christmas.
And then there's, our disabled folks with like cognitive issues. A lot of times they're not legally allowed to vote. And, there's so many groups that are disenfranchised that we don't talk about. But in terms of local races, I did vote this year.
Did you vote for the blue or the green M&M?
I voted for both, and then I voted for none. As a resident of the District of Columbia, my vote really doesn't mean a fucking thing. It means nothing because we have no votes in Congress. We have no we technically have representation in the Senate and the House, but they can't vote. So they have no say on what happens. And then even on this like very local municipal level, you could say, oh, but Jen, you can vote for who's your mayor and da-da-da. But the other issue is that Congress controls DC's purse strings. So you can get, we'll say you get a good far left, great candidate into office, but they can't actually pass or properly fund the policy they want because Congress can undermine that. And, I think part of the reason DC has not been granted statehood, even though they've been voting for it since the early 80s, is because DC was historically a very black city. I really think it's only because of gentrification and the influx of white people and people with money that the Democrats have decided that they're going to support DC statehood. Before that, they never gave a damn.
Well, it's like the opium thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this crack in the black communities that you put into the black communities, you don't care about that. But white kids are dying of opium. Oh, opium! Oh my goodness gracious, white Jesus, save these children.
Well, and even that though, let's be real, they didn't care when it was poor white people in say like Appalachia. They didn't care about them. It wasn't until little upper middle class Johnny started dying that it became a problem. I actually watched 2 documentaries last night. One was about meth, the influx of this, highly concentrated new form of meth called ice coming into Arkansas from Mexico. And then the other one was about the opiate, so-called crisis in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Every single fucking person in those 2 movies was white. Every last one. And I was just like, we've got a real crisis with meth on some of our reservations. You're not addressing the issues of, crack addictions or heroin addictions within communities of color. So does it really only count when it's white people? Yeah. Is that really it? But then on the flip side of that whole opiate bullshit has created problems for those of us who have chronic pain. Now we can't get anything and we're constantly being labeled as drug seekers. And the ironic part is that the medical system was really never giving red, black, and brown folks opiates in the first place because they think we're all a bunch of junkies or we're lying about our pain. So we've never really been the ones that have, been on that side of this, not now that we've jumped from elections to the opiate crisis.
It's the all-encompassing circle of white supremacy, and you talked about how it's poor white folks too, but that is also within that white supremacist circle. If you're not wealthy, male, cisgendered, able-bodied, if I'm missing anything, if you're not of that bracket, you are less than in this society. You're less than in white society as a whole. If you're talking about UK, Belgium, America, Canada, etc., and you're definitely less than in Americana. And voting, drugs, arrests, the police, you name it. It's just. My mother died when she was 45 years old in 1996. I was only 8. Of lung cancer, she died. And I find out recently there's been a lung cancer vaccine, but it's in Cuba, and it's illegal in the United States. So there's collateral damage to white supremacy. My mother dying of lung cancer when she could have had actual treatment, and it's sick. They'll especially talks about painkillers. They push painkillers down our throats, especially you talk about Native folks, and even though most people don't know this, they've had practices of how to practice medicine, politics, the law, morality, whatever, for a long time. And medicine, again, these things are frowned upon. A lot of these things are illegal, and the government will push these very dangerous painkillers on people who are disabled and have chronic pain. And then, like you said, Jen, now these are illegal or harder to get, these painkillers that we've been giving you for a while, or your new insurance doesn't cover it, so you have to pay a few $1,000s for it every month. And then we're left to go, well, what the hell are we supposed to do? You told us to do this. And the crazy thing about all of this, whether we're talking about politics, whether we're talking about the police, drug crisis, whatever, all this stuff is public record. I mean, for goodness sake, there was a movie about 6 or so years ago starring Jeremy Renner, one of the Avengers, Jeremy Renner. It was a movie about how this journalist called Gary Webb found out and published information that showed that the United States has been pumping crack cocaine into the black communities. And he committed suicide because he was blackballed from the American journalists. They said, no, you're lying. What you're saying is incredible. And this is a movie. This is a movie with a pretty decent budget. It had a pretty good promotional structure before the movie came out. And yet you have so many folks talking about how, black people, they're just crack addicts. They're just, they're in the community doing drugs. I want them to do well in their lives, but they can't help themselves. They're not helping themselves. And like, well, geez, you're pumping crack into our dang bloodstream. Like, what do you want us to do? And you're telling our young people, especially our young brothers, saying, hey, you want to make a few $1 million instead of the few dollars that you have in your pocket every month? Here's a very easy way to do that. Now, we're going to arrest you for it later. We won't tell you that in the beginning. This movie has a 7.0 out of 10 on IMDb. Kill the Messenger. This is public record, and people just want to talk about nonsense.
I mean, it's unbelievable how little people want to listen and acknowledge the truth. It's like they only want to hear the truth if it's convenient for them. And just, tying us back to elections, myself and one of my Cherokee Nation relatives, Rebecca Nagel, we've both written about Elizabeth Warren and her false claims to our nation. And we both have been ripped apart every time we publish about this or we talk about it in any way. And it's all these liberals and progressives who, on the one hand, we're probably like, oh, we support no DAPL. But then when NATOs stand up and also call out Democrats, we just get ripped to shreds. We're told, both of us have been called Russian, which is ridiculous.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
It's we must be funded by the GOP, this, that, and the other. We don't know what we're talking about. And it's like, do you understand that the Cherokee are actually one of the best documented people on the face of this earth?
You have a card, don't you? Chief Grand Cherokee? Oh, wait, that wasn't sanctioned by the Cherokee Nation, like so many things.
Yeah, and, we know who our people are. Even if somebody is not eligible for enrollment or citizenship in one of our 3 governments, if you're Cherokee, we're going to find you on one of our rolls. And the rolls are kind of like a census for people listening who aren't familiar with that. Like, my family is on the Dawes rolls. So that's like that's how people know, like beyond the fact that culturally I am Cherokee. But it's amazing. We stand up and we speak out, and we get bitch slapped by all these damn Democrats and progressives. And it's like, well, you clearly don't give a shit about us. I almost, I go back and forth, and I think you and I have talked about this. I've definitely talked to Black friends about this, about how hyper erasure is how white supremacy and racism really plays out for Indigenous people. But after, the fight at Standing Rock against Dakota Access Pipeline, a lot of non-natives have suddenly realized that we actually do still exist.
Yeah.
And I almost can't help but wonder if we were better off when the white people thought we were all dead. Because they're not helping. They're not doing anything for us. They're not doing a damn thing. I can post something on social media about, the rates of, alcoholism or something in Native communities, or how Trump is trying to, steal more of our land. And the white liberals will get on there, oh, the poor Native Americans, da-da-da, and there's all this white saviorism. But the minute that, like myself or Rebecca, we talk about, how the Democrats are hurting us, then it's like, oh, y'all aren't real, you're not really Native, you're hired by the GOP, you're just Russian. And it's like nothing we ever say matters. It doesn't count. It just never fucking matters to anyone, it seems like.
It's absolutely terrifying how low either side will go to defend their supremacy over us and their genocidal republic. Even the alleged far leftists who are white will go down that route. I am so, and look, I hate the Democratic Party because they hated me first. I hate the Republican Party because they hated me first. I am so sick of white Marxists. You don't know. I mean, my gosh, you have no idea. It's just, you have, if it's a white person, so almost every single time will go, well, no, try this. But then, isn't that y'all system? That's it's your system. It's not our. Okay, so why do you keep pushing your values onto us when our values, speaking for both of us, Native and Black folks, Africa, Turtle Island, South America, we were fine. We were so fine. White folks were jealous of the both of us, and you have communists, Marxists saying, no, look, just try communism. I mean, some of the Panthers were communists, Maoists, Marxists, etc. And yet we're going to have amnesia again. Oh wait, Karl Marx openly used the N-word, huge racist. Engels, his homie, huge racist, comparing the brains of Native people, white people, Black people, saying, which one was more intelligent, just straight out eugenics. And even trickling that racist communist ideology trickles down to the 60s, Martin Luther King, and the communists were going, hey, dude, why don't you become a communist? I mean, we work together and then take this thing down. And he was a Christian man, which you can agree with or disagree with. And he was, these values that you have don't align with mine. Thank you, but no thank you, graciously said back to the communists. And the communists were like, well, fuck you, and decided to spread misinformation to the Black community, saying that he was a big-time Democrat supporting liberals and putting him even further into harm's way. And you can, same with Republicans, Democrats, whatever. You go back to the beginning of communism in this country, and it was racist. It was supporting economic system for white folks, that's what communism is, anyways. And yeah, anti-capitalist. That's great. I'd get with you if you actually agree that we were human beings and understood that we have our own sets of systems that were in place for thousands of years. And it's 2018. We got a black Democrat in Georgia running for governor. We just had a black president for 8 years. We may have with Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, the next president in 2020. So we buy into it. We will buy into it. I mean, so we'll buy into this white supremacy. So far, one of my heroes, I would not be the person I am today without him, Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Ture. He says in his speech, I believe it was at Berkeley, arguably his most famous speech, otherwise it was a brilliant speech. He goes, the white man, they put forth an idea to exterminate the red man. And he goes, and they did it, and they did it, and they did it. And Stokely had this tendency to repeat what he just said for emphasis, which is a skill of his. So he's telling all these people of Berkeley, yeah, all the Native people died. It's 1960, I think it was 66. All the Native people are dead. So if you're believing what Stokely was saying at the time, and flash forward, we have troops on the U.S.-Mexican border putting barbed wire up, trying to stop these migrants from coming into America after the United States has, for the longest time, destabilized Latin America, and then before that, obviously, native land run by native folks. And you have, if you were actually on, if I should say, if the U.S. Census was honest, and there wasn't so much confusion and really a cultural genocide against indigenous people, you would be counting about 30 million Native people in the United States alone. Because if you just look at it from a simplistic view, well, hey, white people came over to Turtle Island, South America. It was nothing but Native people. Then obviously, rape and race mixing, and so then they remixed Native and white folks. Yet, because of cultural genocide, they're called Latinos or Hispanics. Just like black people, we will call ourselves African Americans, even though we're looking at a continent that has 54 countries and 1 billion people, and yet calling ourselves American, even though we've never been treated as such. If you don't believe me, ask Malcolm X. So it's just a vortex of white supremacy, and this election tomorrow is a big part of that vortex. It's an ongoing part of that vortex.
So, the wall in Mexico. I was sitting down just watching some of the mainstream news today to see what all they were reporting on. And I caught a clip of Trump. I believe he was in Ohio, and he was on his way to Indiana to campaign for a congressional race there. And while he's, giving his talk to the press, he said that the Democrats are too open on the borders and they let too many illegals in, and that brings in crime. And, I couldn't help but shake my head. I was like, yeah, we really should have stopped illegals when the white people came over. Because to me, those are the actual illegals, and they're the ones who actually brought the crime here. And, these migrants, many of whom are actually indigenous, like this is their land, a lot of them. And in all of these borders, those borders are man-made. I mean, the U.S.-Mexico border, that's not a tribal border. I mean, it's cut indigenous people's communities apart so that they can't even be together, for ceremony or just to, gather for a meal or something. And, I was so happy a couple of days ago when I read that the Pentagon was refusing to send troops down to the border. But then, I find out today that, almost 7,000 troops are on their way to the border now. And that's on top of the current 120 National Guard members that are down there putting up the razor wire.
Yep.
And just beyond a humanitarian spectrum. Like, if you don't give a shit about people and, indigenous people and so forth, just the cost alone. I've heard that this this could cost the U.S. anywhere from $200 million to $220 million just by the end of 2018. So, I'm looking at that money and I'm like, I know so many homeless two-spirits and trans people right now. I know so many people with disabilities that can't get their medications. Like, I know people who are in serious fucking crisis. And what is the U.S. doing? They're wasting $200 or $220 million putting up razor wire and a fucking wall and trying to keep indigenous people off their own damn lands. Yeah, it's just infuriating.
It's more of that nonsensical conversation that people will just start opening their mouths with to counteract any kind of logical thought and honest conversation about the reality of this society, white society, and the reality of America and what people of color and marginalized people are put through because of those two things. And Trump, like many Republicans, go, the Democrats, they let all the darn immigrants in. Immigrants, that's a phrase from The Simpsons. And yet Obama, a black man, I think, who's a Democrat, he deported more people than any president in the history of the United States. I mean, for goodness sake, if you look at it by the numbers, this man did so much damage in terms of immigrant relations. It's not even funny. He spent more money to fund ICE and to pump up security around the border than he did on the FBI, the Secret Service, the DEA, the U.S. Marshals, and the ATF combined. He spent 15 times more on immigration enforcement than Reagan did in the mid 1980s. Those numbers are adjusted for inflation. Okay, and before Obama took office, you look at there were about 26,000 ICE and Border Patrol agents. The budget was $4.9 billion. Before the end of Obama's first term in office, Obama expanded that by about 3,600%. That's 3,600%. And if you didn't know, Obama's vice president, Joe Biden, took money from Donald Trump. Obama's Secretary of State, the first one, has taken over $100,000 from Donald Trump. So this is, again, how ridiculous and how colluded U.S. politics are. If you're Democrat or Republican, look, if you're a Democrat, you are a covert bigot. If you're a Republican, you're just a bigot. You're fine. Might as well be fine with that title. So, like when I said it, about the Senate race in Arizona, it doesn't matter who these two people are. There's clones of them all over the darn place. And we're talking about Native people, we're talking about black people. And those two groups of people live in Brazil. One, because Brazil is native land, and two, because Brazil, if it were an African country, would have the third biggest black population in Africa. Okay, but black people are actually the majority in Brazil, if you can believe that. And now Brazil is getting a fascist makeover.
Oh God, this guy Jair Bolsonaro, I believe that's how you say his last name. He is a nightmare. He almost, I think, makes Trump look a little better. The more that I learn about this man, the more I'm just like, God, you actually make Trump look good. I didn't think that was possible. But oh man, he's awful. He's not indigenous to that land. He's white. A lot of people in the U.S. seem to think anybody who's from Central or South America must be, that racial category of, Latino or Latinx. But there are a lot of white people that went to Central and South America in particular, after World War II. And these are not good people. And they went down there, they've committed genocide, they've done such awful shit. And this guy is, oh man, he's horrible. I mean, there was when the elections were occurring leading up to it, there's so much violence and out in the streets. I know the Jair, he actually was stabbed at one point. I'm okay with that.
That's fine, yes.
But you know, the people who were against him, like, they're just they've been like, harassed doesn't even begin to explain the level of violence that they are experiencing. Some of which is not new. Indigenous people and Black folks in South America, you know, have to live through unspeakable acts of violence every day that almost make the U.S. and Canada look kind. But, you know, just reading about all this violence and all this intimidation, it almost seems like, you know, like when I think about, you know, America post-Trump, like I think about that and I'm like, okay, the violence we've seen since Trump got elected, it's not new. It's always been there. But him getting elected has sort of emboldened all the white supremacists. They don't feel that they have to hide as much anymore. And that's almost what it looks like is going to happen in Brazil. All those white people down there are going to be emboldened to commit more acts of violence. And, you know, their president, he's horrible. I mean, he actually told a congresswoman that she didn't deserve to be raped because she was, and I quote, very ugly. Like, that's who this man is. You know, he has said that he would rather see his son die in a car accident than be homosexual. You know, he said that he would beat up men if he saw them kissing. You know, he's said so many awful things about Indigenous people. We just don't even have enough time for that. And it's terrifying what's going to happen down there, especially because Trump and this guy are like buddy-buddy.
Yeah, and like you said about it not being new, I've seen a lot of people talk about it, and I mean a lot of people as far as the American lexicon goes and Western culture goes, because a fascist is becoming president, a full-blown, far extreme right, whatever you want to call it, gentleman, asshole is becoming president. And yeah, like you said, this has been happening since Brazil was colonized. I mean, Brazil was the last colonial power to outlaw, at least officially outlaw, slavery. It was 1888, if I'm not mistaken. There are neo-Nazis all over Brazil. Black people are gunned down every 5 minutes there. It might as well be. In 2016, I think there were over 4,000 murders of black people by the police. And there are more black people in Brazil than the United States, but that's still at a higher rate than black people are killed in the United States, which is a lot in the United States. So that just goes to show you how big of a problem this has been. I mean, in the 20th century, from about the 60s to the 80s, I believe, they would just take people of color, mainly black folks, throw them into hospitals, mental hospitals, psych wards, and they killed about 60,000 of them, most of them black. And yeah, that's I didn't learn that in school. I didn't learn that on watching the BBC, MSNBC, you name it. That hasn't been talked about. Just like I guess they call them reserves, which is the same as reservation, in South America, parts of South America, that were put to force Native people from their own land, and just, I mean, you're talking about, I think the Native population is close to or under a million people, which doesn't make any sense because it was nothing but Native people in Brazil, just like Colombia, Venezuela, Chile, Argentina, etc., the entire continent of South America. And yet it's such a small fraction of the population, even though that is indigenous land, and crimes are still being committed, and the Amazon is being cut down more and more and more and more, and these native nations that have, I guess you could say, traditional or more old school ways are just being either killed or their land is being taken away, which is what has been the MO of colonial powers for 500 years. We're either going to take your land or we're going to kill you. And
well, what's happening down there is that there's 100 uncontacted tribes in Brazil, and by uncontacted that means they have not been in contact with the outside world, and so all of their lands are at threat from mining and logging companies. They're coming in, these mining logging companies are coming in, they're outright going in and just murdering these people so that they can get the land. The Awe, I believe is how you say them, they have illegal logging on their lands, and they're just being murdered left, right, and center by these logging companies. But then you also have the issues when you're an uncontacted group of people. You don't have the same health, like immunities to diseases that others do, which is what happened to a lot of indigenous people in the colonies U.S. A lot of our people died of things like smallpox because our bodies were not immune to those sorts of diseases. And the Yanomami, I believe is how it's pronounced, there in the northern part of Brazil, they have a huge epidemic of measles right now because of the influx of the mining industry. So, it's like whether the indigenous people are being outright murdered in cold blood or they're being murdered through these diseases, like at the end of the day, it kind of doesn't matter how they're being killed because they're still being killed. And if indigenous people, this is something that I think, like, when I think about international politics and so forth, it's so easy for those of us in America to just, like, we're very arrogant people. We think the world revolves around us, and we don't pay attention to the outside world. And, this election with Brazil, I could see so many Americans being like, oh, but that's Brazil, it doesn't matter. But what they don't realize is that Brazil is actually considered the fourth largest democracy in the world, I recently learned, which is a little terrifying when you know the history of Brazil. But there are experts on Latin America who are saying that there could be a U.S.-Brazil invasion of Venezuela for their oil. Bolsonaro has said that, there will be not a millimeter. First he said centimeter, then he came back and said millimeter of indigenous land left during his presidency. And what that means is that, on top of this possible invasion of Venezuela for oil, it means that all of that rainforest land, he wants to do agribusiness, he wants to develop it, and that's going to hurt the global community in terms of global climate chaos. And then just even further, like, he wants to move the Brazilian embassy that's in Israel, he wants to move it to Jerusalem.
Oh, I haven't seen that before.
Yeah, I just learned that one today. It's like the more I read about this man, I'm like, oh, he's like the Portuguese version of Trump.
Yeah.
And like, speaking of Portuguese, he actually said at one point in time, he said that indigenous people, that they smell bad and that they don't speak the language, meaning Portuguese. And, I kind of
laughed. How dare they not speak the language that we forced on them at gunpoint? How dare they?
That, and I was like, well, actually, asshole, Portuguese is not the language of that land.
Gosh, most American Brazilian is the language of the land.
Yeah, I'm like, you're the ones not speaking the right damn language.
Yeah. Don't Mexicans speak? They speak Mexican, right?
Oh my God. Hey? And living, so, I live in DC now, which is considered mid-Atlantic, but I lived up in the Northeast for a very long time. I lived in Boston for about a decade. And then I also lived for a short while in Providence and about a year and a half in New York City. So I spent like 12 years up there. And it never ceased to amaze me how many folks would just always say, oh, so-and-so Spanish. Oh, they're Spanish. And it was, they would use the word Spanish in the way that where I grew up, everybody would say, oh, it's Mexican.
Oh my God.
And there's just like no understanding of indigenous cultures and even the differences in these nations that have been created by predominantly white men.
It's complete cultural genocide. It's like that whole African American thing, or just erasing any ingenuity from Native people and other Latinos and Hispanics now. If you actually study the word Latino, wait a minute, that comes from Europe, Latin Europe. You're talking about Europeans coming to now Latin America, South America. Charlie Sheen is Latino, okay? George Lopez is Native. If we're actually having a serious discussion, Jennifer Lopez, if she was, I've said this before, if she was honest about her ethnicity, she'd never become Jennifer Lopez. It is not allowed for Native people to have a Beyonce or Jennifer Lopez or a Barbara Streisand, etc. It's just not allowed, let alone actually have any kind of really any kind of holding on to their own humanity, allowed to be who they are and understand, let alone be allowed to understand who they are. So many, just like with black folks, the languages that we used to speak of our actual ancestors, the specific individual ancestors, like I came from Nigeria, or I came from Mali or Ethiopia, a native person. I'm Cherokee, or I'm Dene, or et cetera, and so often we're not allowed to know our languages. We're not allowed to know where we came from. I mean, Trump, the American Trump, Donald Trump, he's trying to make it so where black people have to tell the census which part of Africa we came from. How the hell are we going to do that? Are you joking?
Well, and on top of that, the part of Africa that you may have came from doesn't exist. Like these countries like Nigeria and stuff, like that would not have been the way people in Africa, centuries ago would have identified. You would have identified by your tribal community.
Yeah. British people picked Nigeria specifically. Actually, the name Nigeria was picked by the English. You're right on the money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've had that conversation similar to that with a friend of mine who their family immigrated from Nigeria, and just talking with them, like they have that direct connection to their land, but at the same time they're like, they don't know what their tribal community was like, they don't know the religious practices that they had, they only know this sort of colonized version of Nigeria, and we've talked about that, and it's settler colonialism. That's what it is. It's just, we think about settler colonialism happening to Native people, but it happens to folks of color around the world. But speaking of Natives not being allowed to have an indigenous Beyonce or so forth, it is Native American Heritage Month.
Yes, it is.
Yay!
We're actually going to talk about something happy. Yes, we are.
Oh, are we? I have a list of unhappy topics. Just like one little thing where I was like, oh yeah, we can put some like fun shit in there too.
We could do both. We can multitask, even though it's un-American to do so.
So, yeah, Native American Heritage Month. I will freely admit I don't know when this became a thing. I don't recall it ever as a child. It seems like it's really only something I've learned about in more recent history for myself. But I find it kind of hilarious in a, palm slap to the face kind of way that November is Native American Heritage Month. Every fall I get really antsy and stressed out. Some people get stressed out because, they got to go back to school, or, the holidays, quote unquote, are coming. For me, it's like, oh yes, the mockery of our genocide is what's coming. In October, we've got Columbus Day. That motherfucker. Then we've got Halloween, which I love. I love Halloween. And as a queer person, that's like my high holy holiday. But these goddamn non-natives have ruined that for me too. There was this white lady who actually dressed up as a
Yeah.
murdered or missing indigenous woman for Halloween. She put on the little Pocahontas costume and then did bullet holes on her head and her fucking chest.
Yeah.
And people defended her. And this is coming on the heels of people like Warren claiming to be Cherokee when they're not. There's this stupid white woman who started a business called the Spunky Squaw, and Facebook will not delete it. And, you know, tons of indigenous people have told her, you know, don't say this. Squaw is a pejorative. It's a horrible word. And, you know, oh, but I love Native people, da, da, da. And, you know,
Then don't say it.
It's not a good word. And don't name your fucking business after us. And, like, the Spunky Squaw? Like, come on, you fucking misogynistic asshole. And, you know, I know that both of those women did get some very violent messages sent their way. And on the one hand, as someone who wants to see oppression end, and particularly as someone, you know, my gender is two-spirit, but I'm very femme in my appearance. I'm biologically female. The world sees me and treats me as a woman, even though that's not really my gender. So I've been on the receiving end of a lot of violence, particularly at the hands of men. And that also includes in movement spaces. So I feel like there's a way to call people out without having to go to a point where we resort to acts of misogyny or other forms of hatred. And, you know, that's kind of how I feel about some of the things that these two white women have had sent to them. But then on the other hand, I'm like, well, you want to play Indian? You want to know what it's like to be a Native woman? Here you go. You're getting a tiny taste. All these hateful messages, all these threats of violence. Yeah, that shit's real. That's our daily experience. So, like, there you go. There's your little taste. It just...
It reminds me of the Ford Kavanaugh situation. Christine Blasey Ford came out and said, look, this guy sexually assaulted me. I'm being honest about it. Here's your first-hand accounts, witnesses up the wazoo. Would you just freaking throw him in jail, or not let him be a freaking Supreme Court justice? And yet, too many men sending her death threats, sending her rape threats, as if, okay, let's pretend she was lying. We're going to attack fake rape allegations with rape threats. What is that? What are you thinking about? But this is the type of thinking that people do in this society.
Yeah, I mean, similar topic, not quite Native American Heritage Month related, but, you know, I have reached my breaking point with seeing violence and bigotry and oppression within movement spaces, and I've started calling some people out within the movements. Are you there, Nolan?
I'm here.
Okay, sorry. My phone did a little funny thing, and I thought maybe I got disconnected.
Sorry about that. It's probably just the FBI.
Yeah, the feds. Hi there.
Hi, Fox Boys International.
And so I've been calling some people out in movement spaces for either being violent or abusive or for backing violent and abusive people. And as a result, I now have people saying, I'm not safe. I can't be trusted. Don't organize with me. And it's like, wait a minute. How am I the one that's not safe when I'm calling out a fucking rapist that's among our midst? Like, we know that this man is a rapist. Why are we letting him stay in our movement? Why are we letting him stay in these organizing spaces? But then I, a person from 3 different communities that suffers from astronomical high rates of, like, sexual assault, am considered not safe to be with. And it's that same sort of mentality of, you know, attacking, you know, Ford for speaking out. It's that very frustrating.
That's straight out. I can only imagine that's straight out colonialism. That you can trace that back before the Civil Rights Movement, but during the Civil Rights Movement, Eldridge Cleaver was a rapist. He raped multiple women. He assaulted a famous and a wonderful Black Panther, Kathleen Cleaver. Yet he was allowed to, do what he wanted within the movement, and he was supported more than Kathleen, even though he was the one hurting Kathleen and others. And we have these thoughts, these artificial thoughts, at least as our communities go, of misogyny and homophobia, transphobia, sexism, etc., that we did not have these thoughts before. In the Mali Empire, which is, if we're talking about money, it's the richest empire in the history of the world. Black man, Mansa Musa, ran it. It was in the Constitution not to hurt women. To actually, it was in our Constitution to protect women. It's in there, and this is how Black societies, African societies, Native societies acted towards women. Native and Black folks had women people. Wow, there's colonial thing. Women people. That's a new one. The Native and Black people both had women running their governments, running their nations. In some Black societies, for goodness sake, we worship women as literal gods or goddesses, whatever terminology you want to use. And yet now, this is where we are. If you are a Black or Native woman, and you're in the movement, you're trying to get us back to that point, trying to get us free. This is what you have to deal with. You have to deal if you come out and say, "Hey, this dude attacked me." The first thought out of our minds from Black and Native men are, "Well, was it your fault? What were you wearing?" Instead of, "Oh shit, that's awful. I'm sorry." And it's all encompassing. As a disabled person, even from my own family members, I've been sick since I was 13. Okay, I almost died on a Christmas day of all days. So I mean, it hasn't been fun. Yet, so often, too often, I've heard from loved ones, "Well, are you eating right? Did you go somewhere and catch something?"
Have you tried yoga or acupuncture?
Oh yes. Have you gone vegan?
Christ.
Instead of like, "Oh wow,
vegan.
that's awful. I'm sorry." Like that's the normal human response to someone suffering harm. Is like, "Well, I'm sorry," not trying to defend what is happening to you. Especially that you're talking about misogyny and sexism. For goodness sake. I mean, read your darn history books. Slavery, native genocide, both of which are still happening. Do you understand the length of how far white folks defiled and abused our women, and even men? I mean, even Black men were raped on the slave line just to show the white man's dominance over us. A very bizarre way of showing their dominance. And they probably said, "Oh, no homo," while they were like, what? These are just ridiculous things. I mean, how do we get here? We get here by, well, one, just straight out violence, greed, and theft, and then complete indoctrination for 500 years. I've had to sit and watch Black men speak in activist spaces, talking about how, and I don't understand how a Black father can be okay with another man, taking up the ass. I mean, that's so wrong. I'm like, do you know where you came from? I mean, there were Black societies that didn't even have genders. So, gay? What's gay? You're just people who, having sex with another person or in love with another person. But these are the thoughts that we have now. And you can tie it back to Black History Month, Native Heritage Month, U.S. politics, whatever you want to tie it back to. The only way we get out of this and get back to that, well, by comparison, let's just call it utopias, Black and Native societies, is if we actually go back and study what we used to do, what we used to believe in, what were our moral values. If we're going to say, I'm going to end my tangent right here, but we think white people invented socialism. We were practicing socialism thousands of years ago. People, for the people, by the people, helping people in the community, running cities, running things, helping other people in need. Native people, if somebody was disabled, there was no, what insurance do you have? It's like, no, this person is hurt. Let's go over to their house and help them. And that's the end of it. And
Yep.
we need to get back to what we used to do and who we really are. It's the only way out of this.
Yep, I agree. Going back to Native American Heritage Month,
Yes.
you and I go off on tangents so easily.
It's just too much bullshit to get through.
Oh,
It's
I
hard.
know. There's too much.
Yeah.
The other reason I find it comical that November is Native American Heritage Month is because you have Thanksgiving,
Mhm.
a holiday that literally only exists to celebrate the genocide of indigenous people. I am constantly amazed how many people just refuse to recognize. It's like when I talk to people here in DC about what the football team mascot actually means. They just don't want to believe it. They don't want to believe that they are supporting something so hateful, I think. And I
Named
think
after George Washington, by the way, killed Native children.
Yeah, and Thanksgiving, there's that stupid tale that we're all told as children. Oh, the Indians and the Pilgrims sat down. Oh, blah 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 blah. Well, yes, Native people did teach the goddamn white people how to live on this land. If the white people hadn't worked with indigenous people for a while, they wouldn't have survived here. But once they figured shit out, they just started killing us all off. And that's where the Thanksgiving feasts actually come from. Every time those white fuckers would go invade a village, destroy the crops, rape and murder everybody, they'd have a Thanksgiving feast. And eventually there were so many Thanksgiving feasts happening that Lincoln said, hold up. We can't keep having all of these holidays. We gotta just do one day a year. And that is how Thanksgiving happened.
The man who holds the record for biggest mass hanging in U.S. history.
Yes.
40 killed Native people.
Yep.
Yeah.
40 Dakota men. And 38 of those were hung on the 26th of December, so a day after Christmas. Yeah. What a great Christian he was.
Well, but depending on what you believe, he maybe was a great Christian.
Yeah, and as I'm looking at the variety of issues we have in the Native community right now, the different problems that we have. Here we are, Native American Heritage Month, but we're fighting in North Dakota these stupid voter ID laws that require that everybody have a street address on their ID. Never mind that on some reservations in tribal lands, there are no street addresses. Yeah. So there literally is no street address. So you can't get an ID with a street address.
Which is why the law was passed,
Yeah. And then, the Supreme Court, the way that's been stacked, we're at a very high risk of ICWA, which is the Indian Child Welfare Act, being overturned. ICWA was put into place because in the 60s and 70s, it was estimated that anywhere from 25 to 35% of all Native children in the U.S. were removed to non-Native homes. So just like we had the boarding schools and such, the foster system has been used as a way to commit cultural genocide. And ICWA was the result of that. And now we've got all of the Goldwater Institute, for fuck's sake, says that they want to overturn ICWA. Why the hell does the Goldwater Institute care about the Indian Child Welfare Act?
Isn't it Barry Goldwater's Institute?
Yeah, they're basically a libertarian organization. They say on their website that they're fighting for limited government, economic freedom, and individual liberty. Nothing of that has to do with indigenous people, but overturning ICWA is a way of undermining tribal sovereignty. It's a way of further culturally assimilating us, which makes it easier to take our lands and our resources. And we're running out of time, and I know we want to talk about Yemen. And as we kind of planned, instead of me sitting here talking about all of the horrible things that are happening to indigenous people, I tried to think about, a leader in our community that, past or present, has done amazing work for us. And I kept coming up with so many that I asked some of my indigenous friends, like, who would you say is like a hero in your community? And so many people were named that I still am just sitting here going, I don't know. I really don't. But what I did love is that a lot of the people who were named are actually indigenous women. Yeah. So it was like Madonna Thunderhawk, who she's Lakota. I've had the privilege of interviewing her. She was part of AIM back in the day, and she's still really active in her land. She's part of the Lakota Law Project. Chairman Frazier, who is the tribal chairman for the Cheyenne River Sioux. I've once again had the privilege of interviewing him. Vanessa Bolin, who is one of my Sloggy elders, Sloggy being a Cherokee word for Cherokee. There were just so many amazing people named, and it gives me hope. I'm not always going to agree with or even like every indigenous person I meet, and the same goes for them for me. But it's kind of like, I can't remember the black woman's name who said this, but she said, I'm rooting for all black people. Well, I kind of feel that way about indigenous people. Like, even the ones that I'm sitting here shaking my head going, dear God, would you please stop being an apple? But it made me very happy when I saw that today. And I want to focus on one person in particular just for a moment, and that's Joy Braun. Joy is a badass. I love Joy so much. I love all of these people that I mentioned. But Joy is one of the first people that I really sort of connected with through Standing Rock, that I feel like in kind of a longer term, meaningful way. She is Cheyenne River Sioux. Their lands are in what's known as South Dakota. And she has been in the fight against DAPL. She's been in the fight against the Keystone XL, which is back under construction right now and threatening their lands. She's fighting uranium mining. She's fighting, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and children and so forth. She's a strong supporter for those of us who are Two-Spirit. And she's phenomenal. And she's also has health problems and disabilities. Like, I have seen her at conferences and things where she's so sick, but she's still showing up and doing the work. And so I'm going to leave Native American Heritage Month on that note, that even with all the horrible shit that's been done to us and still being done to us, we Indigenous people still get up every day and we live our lives, we take care of ourselves and our families and our communities, and we fight for the betterment of not just ourselves, but all of the 7 generations to come.
I will name Jen Deerinwater. One, because she's one of my favorite people, and 2, I've learned so much from you, and I would not be able to continue to improve on my own, I think, self-worth as a marginalized person, both black and disabled, and my knowledge of Native people and Native nations and the Native situation that we still have in 2018, as you just so well said so well. And Joy is another great one. I'm glad you brought her up, and like her, you have fought multiple pipelines across the country, and it's an honor and pleasure to. You are my sister, and I love you. So.
I love you too. I'm so thankful that we got to meet and connect and grow this, friendship and this, I don't want to say allyship, this sort of accomplishment of trying to help bridge that divide that unfortunately Black and Native people have, as a result of colonization. And I'm very thankful to have you in my life as well. So we've got 15 minutes left. Yemen,
yes.
Yemen. Let's cover Yemen.
Because nobody else does. I mean, somebody needs to do it. You have the most, again, liberal is a bad word. You have MSNBC, the most liberal network in America, at least that's how it's touted. And they spent 1 hour of an entire year, 2017, talking about the Yemeni genocide. You're talking about 20 million people are in need of immediate humanitarian aid. Millions of kids are starving. This has been called one of the worst crises in modern history, and no one is talking about it. And this is one reason why nobody's talking about it, because it's backed by the United States. The Saudi-led coalition has gotten so much help from the United States, it's not even funny. There are American troops in Yemen right now fighting Houthi rebels. The part of the reason why it has the problem that it has now of these people in Yemen, Yemeni people, they're being boxed in within their own country with no way to get out and get away from these atrocities, is because you have the British government. They came in hundreds of years ago in I believe it was the 19th century, because it was a rich coffee country. It had a lot of richness as far as coffee beans and whatnot. And you've also had the Ottoman Empire before that, Turkish Empire, take control of that country. And 20th century, you have a country in Yemen split in two, North and South Yemen. Finally, the British get out in the middle half of the century. It's as we've seen so far, so many countries of colors, black and native as well. After we gain our independence, quote unquote, it's so hard to build everything back up, and that's what we've seen in Yemen. And Saudi Arabia has recently tried to basically take over Yemen. Greed is one of the ugliest things in the world, and you can again tie it into the U.S. elections and U.S. politics. You have Trump; he's given $100 million or so to the Saudis as far as weaponry goes. You have Hillary Clinton, 20% of her two campaigns for president in 2008 and 2016 funded by the House of Saud, according to their current crown prince. And she helped facilitate a $29 billion with a B weapons deal with Saudi Arabia. And those were airships. And if you've known anything about this situation, the Saudis and the Saudi-led coalition and the Western powers backing them use airstrikes all the time to try to clear out space to continue to try to take over the country. Children dying every 5 seconds, children being killed, children starving, children with cholera. The all-encompassing way of white supremacy. There are over 200,000 black people in Yemen because it's right next to Northeast Africa. So this is a serious problem. If it was 20 million Europeans in trouble, it'd be the biggest story in the world. It'd be the only thing anybody's talking about. Brussels is bombed. Oh my gosh, it's the worst thing in the world. France is bombed. Oh my gosh, it's the worst thing in the world. 9/11 is the worst thing in the world. Well, and that was 2,000 people. That was awful. But what about this? You're talking about millions of people in danger, thousands of people, even more than 2,000 have been killed. So it's white silence to it.
Yeah, this is not an area of the world that I'm super familiar with. So I was doing my research for today, and it's unbelievable how deep Saudi Arabia's tentacles go into the U.S. And it's said that it's estimated that the House of Saud has anywhere currently from 5,000 to 15,000 family members, and of those, it's estimated that 2,000 of them are in positions of control over the government, and that they have a net worth of $1 trillion.
Oh yeah,
$1 trillion. And so that kind of made me go, well, okay, where is this money going? Because I know that the U.S. is in bed with, the Saudis because of arms and oil. But, it was unbelievable as I was looking, what does Saudi Arabia have its investments in the U.S.? Just trying to understand how in bed we are with them and why we're okay with this, genocide happening in Yemen. And 10% of Uber is owned by Saudi Arabia. They also own parts of Slack, WeWork, and DoorDash, and that they have invested $11 billion in the tech industry here in the U.S. So, and like, I've always known Saudi Arabia is, human rights violator. They're not a good place. But, it just was like, wow, I don't use Uber because Uber is all about raping women. But I have had to use Slack for work. And it was like, well, great. It's good to know I'm supporting this, this horrible nation. And, and then we had the sanctions that just came out against Iran, which is actually really interesting as I've been learning more about this history there, that, part of the reason that the Saudis are fighting and, committing genocide in Yemen is because you have some of the radical folks from Iran there, and Saudi, of course, hates Iran. And so these sanctions today that I'm reading about, all these sanctions that are happening, which I still have not been able to wrap my head around entirely, but Trump has decided he's going to do sanctions against Iran. Iran's economy mostly runs around the oil industry. And so it's like, well, okay, how does this sanctioning Iran's oil industry, does that somehow prop up Saudi Arabia's industry more? It's just, it's ridiculous the way these things all tie together. And, yeah.
And Iran was overthrown by the United States back the early 50s. And like everything else, like Mexicans coming in. You stole Mexico. Be quiet. Mm-hmm. Iran is just a terrorist nation. You turned Iran into a dictatorship, and now you're whining about it. You're in bed with Saudi Arabia, and now you're whining about it because one guy, Jamal Khashoggi, who's a freaking Saudi who worked for the dang government, the House of Saud, was murdered by Saudi Arabia, and only because he came out against the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, not because of Yemen, not because of the atrocities of the women, not because of the atrocities of homosexuals, etc., because of I don't like this one guy who's kind of young. I just don't agree with him. Forget everything else. And he's tied into a lot of Washington politicians. He gave a lot of advice to people in Washington on matters of the Middle East. And today I heard a British politician speaking out against Saudi Arabia. He's like, we really need to take what Saudi Arabia is doing as far as human rights violations go. We have to take that seriously. And the most concerning of those violations is the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Not 20 million people in Yemen. Are you brain dead?
Yeah. Yep. Oh, Senator Lindsey Graham, he actually said, and I quote, "I feel used and abused because of Saudis killing Jamal Khashoggi." Yeah, I was just like, wow, you feel used and abused. Okay.
That's not a white man talking. I don't know what is.
Yeah, and
Jeez.
when I was, reading up on all these new sanctions and things and trying to wrap my head around it and the human rights impact as well as, the impacts on global climate chaos, all I kept thinking is these sanctions are going to raise an anti-U.S. feeling in Iran.
If it wasn't already there.
Yeah, exactly. As an indigenous person and as a person who the U.S. literally considers me a terrorist, it's like, I understand. People are coming into your homelands. They're fucking shit up. They're doing awful things to you. Of course you're going to stand up and fight back. So that's the other thing, is just when the U.S. is like, oh, we need to get terrorism under control. It's like, well, actually, the U.S. is creating these so-called terrorists because you're going into people's homelands and you're murdering them and you're raping them and you're doing unspeakable things. Of course they're going to be against you. So, just reading about the sanctions, I was like, great, now we're going to have this rise in, like, global terrorism, supposedly. And, like, what does that mean?
and it's a two-pronged attack. You have the United States creating modern Islamic extremism. Reagan had Islamic extremists in the White House, and basically set off. Okay, here and now we have the Taliban. Now we have Al Qaeda. Now you have ISIS, and the succeeding administrations funding said terrorists. Even ISIS. ISIS has over it's at least $1 billion, and maybe in the billions of dollars worth of U.S. weapons, American-made weapons. Hillary, I mean, I will bring her up, just like I bring anybody up. I mean, Bernie Sanders, Lindsey Graham, you name it. I bring her up because she's as bad as Trump. She's one of the worst people on the planet. She's committed genocide against so many people I can't even think straight. She's been in bed with a French company who's done deals with ISIS, Lafarge, $1 billion company. She's, again, Saudi Arabia, $29 billion arms deal. Obama pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into their armed forces. So this is it's sick in terms of Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. People will, like you said, oh, the terrorism. Well, then stop bombing them. You said it perfectly. I mean, if someone comes into your house, kills your parents, says, I'm your parents. I'm your dad. I'm your mom. You have to listen to me. I'm in charge. And starts doing horrible things to you. If you find out there was a larger force that put them in there, I would hope you're upset with them. If you're not upset with them, something's wrong with you. I mean, we say it to each other all the time, Jen and I. If you're black and native and you're not angry, something's wrong with you. All over the Middle East, for goodness sake. I mean, and Yemen, as much as anybody, it's just sadistic how hypocritical Western society is and white society is. I mean, people were pulling out their businesses from a conference in Saudi Arabia, business conference a couple weeks ago, only because of Khashoggi's murder. Not because of all those horrible things that Saudi Arabia's been doing to people and countries, just because of this one crooked guy who got killed and tortured in horrible ways. Just one guy.
The ironic part, too, and looks like we're about to run out of time, is that here in the U.S., those of us who are journalists and also, and I quote, this is from the government, social media influencers, we're all on a list being watched by Homeland Security. So why do we care if a Saudi journalist is murdered when journalists here in the U.S. are being treated like terrorists?
And who weren't in bed with a horribly oppressive government like Khashoggi was before he turned from the Saudi government.
Exactly.
I think we should share a story, since we can technically go like a minute or two over time to wrap up. Since you brought up the social media influencer thing, these names they come up with us, come up for us. It's just so clever. Black identity extremists, social media influencers. I'll give them credit. They're very clever. Jen and I met in D.C. And I believe it was November of 2016.
2016, yeah.
And I had to look at this ugly statue that's right outside the White House that nobody talks about or is upset about. Andrew Jackson. One of the worst people to ever live. He cut the noses off of Native people and actually sent them to his girlfriends, plural. And I was a little sick of seeing it. And before I left, I propositioned Jen to go, hey, let's try an experiment. And we called it the Hitler experiment. And we try to get people to sign a petition where we would put up a statue of Adolf Hitler in the same park, Lafayette Park, where the Jackson statue is. Because, killing, mass murdering since that's fine with you, with Jackson, to be fine with you with Hitler, right? Jackson also was a slave owner. And we had 5 people sign it in an hour.
And it was a slow day out there, too.
Yeah.
There were not a lot of people around.
And I was there for about 2 months. Had we done that every day for 2 months, I don't want to know how many signatures we would have gotten. This is Hitler. So people will even be okay with Adolf Hitler, for goodness sake, just to defend this genocidal society. And Jen is a wonderful journalist and documents events and things so well with photography and writing. And you Facebook Live the whole thing along with taking pictures. And what happened?
I tried to Facebook Live it, but we got cut off.
The whole thing was live. I think you even replied to a couple comments, and then thin air.
Yeah.
And that was by Facebook and/or the United States government. I've heard a blogger over there in DC Fred. If anybody's from DC, you may know him. You just took a picture of Obama when he was out and about, and he just I'm going to check the photo out on my phone. It was gone. That's how easily they will get into our phones, devices, and I mean, I guess. And just to wrap up, Cambridge Analytica, they have fixed so many elections, created problems in so many elections around the world, Brazil, the United States. And how many people from Cambridge Analytica, the tech company, are going to prison? Is Zuckerberg going to prison, the founder and CEO of Facebook, for illegally infiltrating and messing with the results of elections? Anybody? But no, because nobody cares. No, complete and utter silence, like on so many of the issues we just covered. And Brazil's president, U.S. president, you name it. Theresa May is the prime minister of the UK. It's fine because she's better than Trump. They'll boycott Trump when he goes over there, but yeah, we're fine with her leading us as a country. That makes total sense. This is the world we live in, ladies and gentlemen. The white world that we live in.
Indeed it is. So, it's time for us to wrap up.
We have set our piece live on the 5. Live on the 5th is technically the full name of the day. Protests all over the world. I've seen pictures from Amsterdam, Caracas, somewhere in Minnesota, don't know the exact city, London. I participated in this day last year in LA. The LAPD followed us the whole time. In fact, they flashed a taser at us. Just playing with the taser. It's like the thing to play with because they literally kill us with tasers sometimes. But overall, it's a good day. It signifies fighting tyranny, being against tyranny, fascism, oppression, whatever creed you come from. If you're for human rights, this is a day for you and a day to fight back. And if you're just getting into these type of issues or just issues at large, this is a perfect type of day to kick you off into fighting back on a daily basis, because for us, people like Jen and I, Black and Native folks, this is a daily struggle for us. So I want to thank Tim, our producer, for inviting us to do this show, and thank you for listening, and you'll have a great week.
Thank you guys for doing this show. It was really awesome. Very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. And for anybody out there that wants to learn more about me and my work, just go to jendeerinwater.com, JenDeerinwater.com. And thank you, Nolan and Tim.
Indeed.
Thank you. Awesome show again. So coming up next, we're going to have some more random revolutionary quote unquote music. And then we're going to move everybody over at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern to Canadian Glen, the view up here, for the show we've been talking about all damn day. So once this is over, I'm going to shut this show down, and then music will start until Glen's show. So anything else you guys got to talk about before we end this?
Vote for
Don't
Elmo
celebrate
and
Thanksgiving.
Don't celebrate that.
Yeah, don't celebrate genocide days. Not Thanksgiving, not Columbus Day, not any of them.
Yeah. Use that money you would have spent on that Thanksgiving meal and give it to a native-led organization instead.
Yeah. Amen.
Boom, I like that idea.
The Code of All Project's a great one. Jen Masson donation.
Yep, or Indigenous Women's Resource Center. Yep.
Good.
Yep.
Yeah, so definitely, if you guys already don't, whoever's listening, follow Nolan Hack and Jen Deerinwater because they're both super awesome. And they come on this show and grace you guys with their awesome, informative presence every so often, and it's wonderful. So, that's it. We're going to shut this down. In a couple minutes, music will be up until Canadian Glen show comes on. Thanks again, guys. Thanks to all the listeners,
Thank you.
Peace out.
All right, bye.